Now let's tackle the problem, kind of a problem I guess, that we're sending a request for every keystroke. We might not want to do that because we're spamming our server with requests if we do that. So would probably be better if we set some timer, and if the timer expired, we check if the current input in this, well, input here, is the same as at the beginning of the timer, and only if it's the same we know that there has been a pause and the user paused typing, and therefore we probably want to send a request. Now clear what I mean? Well, let me show you. Here is our effect, and in the end, here we're fetching data. Now at the beginning of the effect, I'll now actually use setTimeout, which is a normal JavaScript function, has nothing to do with hooks of course, to set a timer. And let's say the timer is 500 milliseconds, and you can use any value you want. Now I want to wait for the user to pause typing for 500 milliseconds, and only if that happened, I want to send a request. So in this anonymous function I'm passing here as a first argument to setTimeout, which is the function that executes after 500 milliseconds, there I want to send that request. So I'll move all that logic for constructing that query and sending that request into that setTimeout function. So that will happen after 500 milliseconds. Right now, of course, we're only deferring this, where we're not really doing anything else. Instead, we'll have to make sure that we also check after these 500 milliseconds, so inside of the function we pass the setTimeout, if entered value, entered filter, is the same as the entered value 500 milliseconds ago. Now, how can we do that? For that, it's important to understand how closures work in JavaScript. Entered filter here will actually be locked in when we set the timer. So it will not be the value the user has entered after this timer expired. It will be the value the user entered when we set this timer. That's important. That's how JavaScript works. So entered filter here will not be the current value the user entered. It will be the old value 500 milliseconds ago. Basically when useEffect executed and when we then set the timer therefore. So that's what entered filter will be. It will not be the current input, but the old one, so to say. Now, I also need the current one to compare what's currently in the input with what the user entered 500 milliseconds ago. And only if it's the same, I know, okay, seems to be the value the user wants to go with. At least the user paused typing, so now is the time to send the HTTP request. So we need to compare it, but how do we get the current value? Well, we get that current value with something you also learned about in this course, with a reference. For that, React also has a hook, useref. This allows us to create a reference simply by calling useref, and you can store this in a constant, let's say the input ref, just like that. Now you can assign this to a DOM element by simply going to the element, in our case the input here, and there add the ref property, the ref prop, a special prop supported by React, and point at input ref. Now we established a connection between this input here, this input element, and the input ref variable or constant up here. We can now use this here and compare it. Input ref, current is the element. Current is a property the ref simply has, this ref object simply has. This will be an input element, therefore here we can check the value. If that value, and that will be the current value, because input ref is defined outside of the closure, so that's not locked in or anything like that. So that's the current value currently entered in the input. If that's the same as the entered value when we set the timer, then we know the value hasn't changed in between, or at least it's now the same as it was at the beginning of the timer. So it's actually there, and hence I'll cut this one more time. It's actually there inside of this if statement where we want to construct that query and send the request. Now, one important note here. Input ref, therefore now, of course, also is a dependency of our effect here, because I'm using input ref in the effect. And therefore, let's also add input ref here to make sure that we also rerun the effect if we should change what's stored in input ref. With that, let's save this. And now let me try typing, and that seems to work. I can filter, but we'll see something interesting if we have a look at the network tab. If I clear this, you see as I type, as long as I keep typing, no request is getting sent. Only if I make a short pause, a request is sent off. So if I type apples, it's only sent once I stop typing for 500 milliseconds. We'll have a problem though. Right now, we're not doing this in a perfect way. We're setting the timer, but keep in mind that we set a new timer whenever the effect runs, and the effect still runs in the end whenever our input changes. So we're setting a bunch of timers, which are all managed independently. That's not really what we want here.